I've invited Sean here from the SF Amateur Radio Club. So we're going to learn tonight about the San Francisco Wireless Emergency Mesh Network, which we've had some interest here about doing microwave mesh networks. And so, yeah, I'll let you take the floor, Sean.
So I wanted to thank Greg for inviting me here tonight. So I'm with the San Francisco Amateur Radio Club, as well as I'm an ORCA member, and I'm pretty intimately involved now with the San Francisco Bay Area Wireless Emergency Mesh. Let me just set the stage here. Humans crave connectivity. I think we can all agree on that. We're all hams, and we do it for communication. That's pretty much what ham radio is all about. Network-based technology permeates every aspect of our daily lives, from news to entertainment to communication. The familiarity of these services does not change during a disaster or an emergency. We still need to know what's going on, communicate with our friends and family, and coordinate within our communities. What is the San Francisco Wireless Emergency Mesh? So the San Francisco Wireless Emergency Mesh, or SFWEM as we call it, is a volunteer-led project to deploy a resilient high-speed amateur radio emergency data network, also known as ARDEN, throughout the San Francisco and the greater Bay Area for use during disasters, emergencies, and large community events by responders, volunteers, and served agencies. What is ARDEN? ARDEN is the Amateur Radio Emergency Data Network, and it leverages open source software that's based on OpenWRT. And it runs on inexpensive off-the-shelf Wi-Fi radios. That allows them to access non-shared frequencies that are allocated within the amateur radio spectrum. I got a little cost breakdown here. The thing about this, the mesh is it can be kind of as cheap or as expensive as you want it to be. Kind of on the right there, you'll see there's some photos of some commonly used devices that we have in circulation, around the mesh. Obviously, they're not to scale. Your mileage may vary there, but these are just some photos that kind of show you guys what we have. So that first device there is a rocket, and that's kind of the most common gateway drug. That was the first thing my dealer gave to me when they got me hooked on the mesh, and that got me on the mesh, and that was kind of the proof of concept. Oh, I can connect to the mesh. And then I moved on to the guy to the right there, that dish, which is a much more powerful antenna. Gain is always the name of the game in all things radio, so the dish has a lot more gain. So the third guy over on the top row is basically a wireless router. And it's very common that we use those to connect the ARDEN network to our home network to provide internet access to the nodes, to do firmware updates, or allow us to surf our internet, our home internet, while we're connected to the ARDEN network. So I'm giving you this presentation here tonight from my mesh network, and after this, hopefully I'll give you guys a tour of kind of the mesh and kind of what it looks like as it sits today. The next two devices down in the bottom row are much more powerful devices, the rocket and then that dish. Those are something we put typically at what we call hub sites or mountaintop sites, or sites where they have a lot more elevation, they have a lot more power, and they have a lot more reach. And then that last little guy there is actually a tiny little router. It's about the size of a USB memory key, if you've seen those. Maybe USB memory keys circa the early 2000s or something, where they're a little bit larger than the ones that are almost invisible these days. A little micro router, and you can load it with the ARDEN firmware. You throw it, you plug it into any device, and it automatically creates a mesh network. So a use case for that is if you had a box full of those pre-configured, you could hand them out to a bunch of people in an area. They can all stick them in their laptops, and instantly you've created a mesh. So it's pretty cool. There's all kinds of different devices you can use to set up ARDEN mesh, and kind of that's just a quick overview. Like I said, it can be as expensive or as cheap as you want it to be. Part of me getting on the mesh was to see how cheaply I could do it, and I was very successful in that. And, a lot of people even have free stuff, stuff they want to give away, or stuff that you can get for cheap. I cruise Craigslist, I find deals on stuff all the time. So it's kind of fun for me. Just make a little game out of it. These radios, they use microwave frequency bands, just like your Wi-Fi router in your house, exactly like your Wi-Fi router in your house, except as hams, we're allowed to use non-shared frequencies that are outside of those bands. Because it's microwave frequency, line of sight is required. It's really important to have line of sight to a node, to another node. These devices are very low power. I mean, they're 600 milliwatts to 1 watt on average, and they typically draw about 8 watts. Those are just kind of very general numbers. It does vary, but you can cover with that kind of power, you can cover distances greater than 30 miles, provided you have sufficient line of sight. I've got a link personally that's 13 miles across the bay, Sutro Tower. It is because the sky's the limit, especially if you have line of sight. All of these guys on the right there are they're stations, or we call them nodes in the mesh. So you'll commonly hear referred to as a node. It's just a station or a radio or an access point. And so advantage of just about all these is there's only a single cable run required. So most of them have, like the first two right there, first row, they have integrated antennas. So all you need to do is run a single Cat5 Ethernet cable to it, and you can power it up on your roof or wherever it's located from inside your house. The lower two are the same, but obviously you see those two little brass nubs on the top of that rocket. It needs the link to an antenna, an external antenna with coax, just like you'd use for your ham radio stuff. Some of them have integrated antennas, some of them have external antennas. So you have the ability to customize, or you can just do something really simple, like that rocket. It works great. It's pretty powerful. Most of the time, it's all you need, unless you got a long distance shot like I did. So the evolution of amateur radio. I'll just kind of go over this real quick. You're probably all familiar with it. With technology, with all things technology, it evolves over time. Obviously, I'm a big proponent of ARDEN and digital comms, but it doesn't eliminate VHF, UHF, or AHF. They still have a purpose, and they'll always be around. But this is just kind of a logical evolution in the chain of technology. But kind of what I wanted to highlight here is, if you look at the digital RF, there you're limited to, that's 1200 to 9600 BPS, or 0.0012 megabytes per second. Whereas you go over to ARDEN and you've got 5 megabytes per second to 120 plus megabytes per second on 5, 10, or 20 megahertz channels. In the digital RF mode, it's mostly text-based, whereas in ARDEN, it supports images, video, voice. Any internet-style application you might be familiar with can usually be supported over ARDEN. Here's some of the non-shared spectrum we're allocated over under Part 97. If you look at the ones there that are in that little wheat color or orange, depending on how your color calibration is on your screen, those are all frequencies that are available only to us as ham radio license holders. So there's no overlap. And that's a big deal, because in the Bay Area, if you guys haven't noticed, we have a high noise floor. We have a lot of RF pollution. To be able to exist and to have a network on frequencies that nobody else can use is a huge benefit to us as ham radio license holders. And that's one of the valuable reasons why you would consider putting up an ARDEN mesh node. Just kind of a quick overview, 33 centimeter, that's 900 megahertz. We don't typically use that. They all have specific use cases, but we don't typically use around here. We don't use 900 that much, nor do we use 2.4 gigahertz just because of the noise floor. 3.4 gigahertz, I would just recommend that you don't get too involved in that if you're getting into ARDEN, because the FCC did recently make a ruling that they were going to sell off a lot of that spectrum, and we're going to basically lose it. So I personally wouldn't invest a lot of money into those radios if it were me, but whichever route you decide to go, maybe 3.4 works best for you. The 5 centimeter band is the 5.8 gigahertz band. You guys are probably very familiar with that, because that's what most Wi-Fi routers use these days, at least if they're any good, because that's where all the bandwidth is in that 5 centimeter band for data for your computers. In the wheat color there, after that star there, those are our non-shared frequencies. So we're typically 170 through 184 is kind of where we exist, at least with SFWEM in the Bay Area, where we're typically in those higher number channels. This kind of translates to about 70 megahertz available to us, 14 5 megahertz channels, 7 10 megahertz channels, and a few 20 megahertz channels. So we just recently started setting up a few 20s for like some backhaul and a little bit more bandwidth, but we're mostly on the 10 megahertz channel. Okay, so what can the mesh do for you? First and foremost, it provides familiar internet services, voice over IP, video streaming, surveillance cameras, emails with images and attachments, weather and air quality sensors, monitoring and control, file sharing and transfers, collaborative document sharing, real-time chat, web-based reporting applications, computer-aided dispatch and situational awareness applications, network time services, GPS tracking, and of course, games. Some ham radio specific use cases, you could do APRS over it. You can run Echolink or internet radio linking project over it. You can run WinLink. Actually, WinLink has native support for mesh networking built into it. It's one of the options that you can select in addition to Telnet or your typical RF link. You can do ADSB stuff where track aircraft, software-defined radio monitoring and control. We have some SDRs on the mesh that you can access and listen to remotely and manipulate, and MMDVM like PyStar hot and OpenSpot hotspots for Fusion, DMR, D-Star, and all that. All of that can run on the mesh. And anywhere in this presentation, I'll send this presentation out for everyone, PDF slides after this, but anywhere you see an underlined link there, that's a link, that's a hyperlink. So you can click that in the presentation and it will take you to the source. So what does a mesh network look like? So these are kind of just very crude, drawings that kind of get you an idea. But, the one on the left over there, that's just basically 4 nodes all linking together. And then there's some devices off of them. So there's a laptop, there's a Wi-Fi access point, at another location where like a tablet could connect to it. And then another one has an IP camera. So, that laptop can access all those services, that IP camera from, through all those nodes. And as you can see, they're all interconnected. So if one of them were to fail, it will just route through the other one. That's kind of the point of a mesh, think of it as like a net. If one node goes down, there's other routes that it can travel. On the right over there is a little bit more elegant mesh with kind of more coverage. In the middle, it's got, the red is the backbone. So those are high mountaintop sites. And then it has some sites, like home sites, like the green ones. And then, the blue ones would be like relay stations. And then the orange ones would be like endpoints, like just, your home or whatever. So it's kind of just a little kind of a drawing of a mesh. So what does the mesh network really look like? I don't expect you to read this. I had to shrink it down to fit it on the screen, but it is in the document and I can show you it in a little bit more detail. But each one of those little white ovals right there represents a node or one of the stations on our mesh. And this was actually just as of a couple hours ago. These are all the mesh nodes of SFWEM and how all the lines reflect how they're interconnected with each other. And this is all from the point of view of the node at the top. Depending on what node you're looking at the mesh from, it's going to look different based on your point of view. But this is kind of how big our mesh is as of a couple hours ago. Kind of here's what it looks like in a more human readable form. This was also as of a couple hours ago. These are all the stations that we have set up that are interlinked, that are on the map, because when you set up your node for the first time, you have the option to put it on this map or not. You put your coordinates in and you hit apply and send them to the mesh server, and it will show up on the map here. So we do have locations, like some of my stations are on here, but some of them are not. I haven't put them on there yet. There are stations that aren't represented here. So this isn't a true representation, but it kind of gives you an idea. So this is the Bay Area. This is SFWEM. So this is California. And this is, California and a couple of other states that kind of fit in the screenshot here. This is kind of the ARDEN project, because like I said, SFWEM is ARDEN, but it's localized to the San Francisco Bay Area. Here's kind of the ARDEN project to kind of give you a scale of how big this thing really is. Here's the United States. So, and just for a quick frame of reference so that you guys understand the colors, the purple ones are 2.4 gigahertz, the orange ones are 5.8, and the blue ones are the 3 gigahertz, and then those little that little magenta one is like a 900 megahertz. So as you can see, depending on the location, they favor one frequency or the other. Like Hawaii, I was just in Hawaii recently for work, and they're like 100% 2.4 gigahertz because it works for them. And it has advantages, propagation advantages that work better in that environment. You choose your frequency based on your environment and your circumstances. So LA, they're probably the largest mesh in the area, in the entire ARDEN ecosystem. a lot of the developers are based out of Los Angeles area, and they were really big into the 3 gigahertz because it worked for them. They had unique interference circumstances, so they used the 3, but they're having to migrate off of that now to something else. So here's the entire world. This thing is very big. It's much bigger than you could imagine. I mean, they use it in other countries. It's kind of it's very common, and actually there's a lot more nodes than actually can be pictured, because once you zoom in, a lot more show up, a lot more are covered here. But obviously there's a link down there, in the bottom and the left. So when you guys get the presentation, you can click the link, you can go to the map, and you can actually look around yourself and you can see what's around. So I encourage you guys to do that. Kind of a brief history of the mesh networking. It's been around for a long time. It kind of started in 2004 with the Linksys WRT54G. I don't know if you guys remember that. Those of you guys that have been around, that was like one of the first most popular routers, and that's kind of when open source firmware on home routers really took off. OpenWRT and DDWRT. I'm a huge fan of those myself, and I use them extensively. Kind of OpenWRT kind of came out around 2006, and then kind of subsequently after that, the BBHN mesh was founded. That's also known as broadband hamnet. And then, in 2015, ARDEN was founded. So ARDEN is basically an evolution of BBHN. And then kind of in 2017, SFWEM was launched. And we're kind of inspired by the SoCal mesh and the Berkeley mesh, which, I don't even know if they're still around. Mesh has been around for a long time. It isn't new. And as you can see by the size of those maps and how many nodes are out there, it's much larger than even SFWEM. SFWEM, our mission is to serve as a force multiplier for education, research, and disaster response using digital communication capabilities. Some of our goals are creating a centralized infrastructure of hosted services. We want to harden key hub sites with redundant power, such as solar and wind, and monitoring. One of the initiatives we're working on too is something we're calling SWEM, which is San Francisco weather, air quality, and radiological monitoring. Those of you guys who have lived through the last few fire seasons kind of understand the importance of kind of accurate air monitoring. And that's one of the projects we're working on. Is we're actually developing our own air monitoring sensors for use on the mesh that don't require like a public cloud or a cloud server. They just report locally to the mesh, so we can have our data at our homes, and then we can also expose that information to the internet if we choose. And another one of the things we're kind of focused on doing is enabling quick deployment of resources to shelters or other temporary emergency facilities. One of the things we work on is we kind of develop portable access nodes and Go kits that are already configured that we could take out and we could deploy a mesh network, in a matter of, minutes to hours. I mean, that's part of one of the things we're really big on is the education. I mean, obviously, getting on the mesh is exciting and it's cool, and I love it, and I know that you guys will too. But part of it is the education. Once you start setting up mesh nodes, you get really good at doing it. And the first time I got on the mesh, I was kind of scratching my head, and it took me a while to kind of figure it all out. But now I could just do it like it, was second nature. And that's a big part of it, because, when the disaster strikes, we live in earthquake country, it's very likely that part of the mesh is going to be impacted, and we're going to have to reset up links real quick and restore our comms. And, we all now have the capability of doing that due to our experience, setting up mesh nodes and, kind of troubleshooting and getting through all of that stuff. So that's kind of a big part of it is education. One of the big news we have is, we have resources now. We had resources before, but, we recently received a $100,000 grant from AmperNet, also known as ARDC, kind of with the focus to provide education, research, and mentorship of the amateur radio community on digital network technologies, and to facilitate rapid ad hoc communication deployments during disasters and emergencies. That was kind of what I was just talking about with the Go bags and the Go kits, and to provide reliable fault-tolerant networks for served agencies to use to protect Bay Area residents and to save lives during disaster situations. The mesh is kind of like the telephone paradox, or kind of the ham radio. If you're the first guy in the world to ever get a ham radio, it's pretty cool, and you can tell all your friends about it, but it's not really that cool if you don't have anyone else to talk to. So the thing about the mesh is it's strength in numbers, right? So every station that goes online the network it grows stronger and becomes more resilient because there's more links and more route for the packets to travel. So, or the data to travel. You know, we need you to kind of put up a station and join us on the mesh. And, you know, if there's no sites near you, that's okay. Because as we build out our network, you know, it's possible to be located in areas where you can't get an RF link to another node. But, you know, we have tunnels, and you can get a tunnel. So you can set up your RF node on your link, on your, you know, on your home or your QTH, and you could get a tunnel into one of our servers or into one of our other mesh nodes rather. And then you could be broadcasting out the mesh in your neighborhood. And then as more nodes get online, eventually we're going to be able to close that gap. And we're going to close, you know, we're going to close off that island of connectivity. And eventually you'll be bridged into the wider mesh. So don't let the fact that you can't get an RF link today discourage you, because it will, you know, it's kind of one of those things, like they said in Wayne's World 2, if you build it, they will come. You know, it's just like the telephone too. There have to be early adopters. You know, you got to be the first guy to buy the telephone, and then somebody else will buy a telephone. And then before you know it, everyone has a telephone. So, and as you can see, it's worked pretty well. The mesh has kind of grown like wildfire in the past few years. Another thing we're looking for is leaders in your community to help organize standing committees across all 4 of our regions. So we're currently divided up into 4 regions: San Francisco, East Bay, South Bay, and North Bay. Kind of these committees are kind of charged with identifying sites for deploying mesh equipment, including hardened hub sites, and to build relationships with local served agencies to help them connect to the mesh network. Another thing we're looking for is people to support these regional standing committees with project committees that would work to define and build things like the shelter kits, emergency monitoring systems, and core infrastructure on an as-needed basis. So basically, we're kind of, you know, we have these permanent committees based on region, and then we have smaller committees that are kind of on an ad hoc basis that serve a specific purpose, depending on, you know, if you're interested in becoming a volunteer or working with us. There's kind of different roles for everybody. All right, so to get started on the mesh, you got to be an FCC licensed amateur radio operator, because that allows you to use Part 97. So I think we've all have that covered here. So another thing is you need to have a line of sight to an existing SFWEM site. But as I said earlier, that's not necessarily true. We do have tunnels, and you can get a tunnel in the interim. So, and then obviously you got to have compatible equipment. There's certain equipment that works with ARDEN and certain equipment does not. So that is a link. So if you click the link, it will take you to the compatibility matrix, and it will show you everything that currently supports ARDEN software. And like I said, it's based on OpenWRT. So it's like a very customized version of OpenWRT, which is obviously Linux, if you guys are familiar with how it works under the hood. But it doesn't matter. Like I said, it can be as simple as you want it to be, or it could be as complicated as you want it to be. And then obviously your equipment has to be running the ARDEN firmware. And then you have to configure your node with the SSID, channel, and bandwidth of the site that you're meshing with. These are the 2 frequencies that we use in the area. Like I said, we're mostly on the 5.8. That's the SSID. And these are the channels that we mostly use. We used to originally, you know, we were really heavy on one channel, but as the mesh grows, you know, if you're like me, you have multiple mesh nodes on your QTH, and you can't run them all on the same channel because they interfere with each other. So you got to put them on different channels. So that's how we kind of grew into more channels. But, you know, you just have to be on the channel of the site that you're connected to. And like I said, I'm available, and the whole SFWEM club is available to help you guys out to get started. It's actually really pretty easy. You know, I just don't want to go into a ton of details here because, you know, this presentation would go on forever. So again, like I said, it's as complicated or as simple as you want it to be. But, you know, we're getting people on the mesh every week. So, you know, it's growing rapidly. So kind of here are some resources to get started. You know, there's some links to the different tools. Obviously, the SFWEM website, we have a getting started page, the MeshMap that kind of gives you a live map of what our mesh looks like. There are some tools, Ubiquit Airlink, you can use to do kind of like a site survey on a map and see if you actually will have, it's a 3D modeling, it's a modeling program. It's pretty good. It takes into account things like terrain and stuff like that, but it does not really account for structures that might have been built recently or trees. So just because it says you're going to have a link doesn't mean that you're going to have a link. Ask me how I know. but it's a really good way to get started and to kind of figure out, is this even feasible? And then obviously Google Earth, we use that a lot. There's nothing that beats site survey. So what, like if you guys reached out to me and you said, hey, Sean, I want to get on the mesh, I would look at your address and I would do a model in Airlink, and then I might look on Google Earth and satellite view and determine if it looks feasible. And then if it does, then we'd probably come out and do a site survey if you needed that help. A lot of people do them themselves, but if you want help, a lot of us are available. And then anyways, obviously the ARDEN documentation is phenomenal. That's a link to the entire documentation that will tell you everything about ARDEN from start to finish, including, what radios to buy, how to flash them with the firmware, how to get set up, basic networking stuff. So, that's definitely some heavy reading material. But again, like I said, if you guys have any questions, just contact us and we can help you out. And then also there's some phone-based site planning and path visualization applications that we like to use. Dioptra if you're an Android fan, and Theodolite if you're an iOS fan. Those are kind of it's an overlay on your camera, and it'll let you get heading and stuff like that, so you can more efficiently point your radios. But you don't even have to do that. I've honestly never used them. I just kind of get my bearings and put the radio up and move it around, and there's a screen on there where it'll give you a tone, and it'll get louder if your signal gets stronger, and it'll go the opposite if your signal gets weaker. So it's pretty easy to do. If you've ever set up a satellite dish, it's a lot like that. This is kind of something that I wanted to share with you guys. This is, obviously you guys are in that blue area, well, some of you are anyways, in Benicia. So that's from Mount Diablo. And we're actually in talk with MDark, talking about potentially putting up some nodes on Mount Diablo on their site. So if that happens, and we feel pretty positive that it will, that's kind of a model of what the coverage is going to look like. Those of you that are closer to the water there are going to be within range of those radios theoretically, and then you would be the ones that would replicate the signal further inland, to the guys that are deeper in, maybe in Fairfield or Vallejo, or eventually we'd love to get all the way to Sacramento. But again, like I said, it's a team effort. None of us can do it alone. And also, that being said, if you guys have any connections and you guys have any resources, to get sites to put up nodes, like I said, they can be very small and they can be very power efficient, and we could do them 100% off grid. We have a lot of them that are 100% off grid with no power. They're all completely solar and they have batteries, so we can kind of overcome all that stuff. It's just, like everything, it's location. So the better locations and the more locations we have, the better and stronger the mesh will get. What's anything without photos? So I wanted to kind of leave you guys with some photos. Kind of, these are kind of doing some installations. On the far left there, those are two of the three founders of SFWEM. And then the gentleman on the next two pictures is Chris. He's actually the president of Orca, working on the Orca repeater site. We have some mesh nodes up at the Orca site. Here's some more fun pictures. Far left, that is on UC Berkeley, Evans Hall. Like I said, that's 100% off-grid node running off that solar panel. That middle node there was my personal node. That was my first getting started node. It since went downhill from there, and it's much more complicated. That was kind of getting started. That was two different nodes making two different connections. One's to Grizzly Peak and one is to Twin Peaks. The dish is to Twin Peaks. The nano station, the little box in the back, is to Grizzly Peak. And then obviously that's a UHF VHF TV antenna. Not that exciting. But then the final one over there on the right, that is at the Moscone Center. We have mesh nodes there and then a webcam. Here's just some other fun nodes. So the one on the left and the one on the far right, if you see the dish on the far right on the top and then on the far left at the bottom, that's actually a 60 gigahertz link that we actually just set up 2 weekends ago. That is actually, so ARDEN does not do 60 gigahertz. So we're actually using it as a backbone link, and it's a 1 gigabit connection backbone for internet connectivity. to some of our sites. And then so obviously the middle one is a combination dish and omni site, you know, a directional antenna and an omnidirectional antenna. The one on the far left there, that's another picture. That is Grizzly Peak on the far left. That is at 60 gigahertz dish at the bottom. And then, you know, that's up at Grizzly Peak right by the KPFA tower. We have some nodes up there. I threw the middle one in there just because it's, you know, those of you that have deed restrictions or HOAs, don't get discouraged. You know, HOA cannot prevent you from putting up a TV antenna. So they actually make a specific Wi-Fi router. It's made by MikroTik, and you use that adapter and you connect it to an inconspicuous satellite TV dish, and you can get on the mesh. So I've installed those myself, and they work great. And then obviously the third is just kind of your average node up on a mast. This is really neat. This is something I just kind of wanted to show you guys real quick. This is kind of an example of one of the Go kits I was talking about, but this one is definitely one of the best ones I've seen. You can see the radios in the top one there, and then in the top picture, and then obviously in the right, there's the phone and a wireless router and a Raspberry Pi down there running services. It's all self-contained in that rolling toolbox over there on the left. So this is kind of what we're developing for the MCOM deployments. You know, you could take this anywhere and just set it up and set up a mesh or loop into the existing mesh. A lot of our guys have portable mesh nodes, and they'll take them out to the park and they'll get on the mesh from wherever they're at, Golden Gate Park or whatever, and then they're on the mesh, and you know, they can do anything that they could do from any other location. So here's kind of just some screenshots I took of some services on the mesh. It's kind of hard to see. You kind of have to experience it for yourself. But, you know, obviously the top is a camera. We have a ton of cameras around. This one happens to be from Grizzly Peak. Over there on the top right, that's what's called PiAware. It's ADS-B aircraft tracking. We have a couple of those servers running on the mesh. You know, they're just Raspberry Pis with an SDR on 1090 megahertz, pulling in the ADS-B data from the aircraft. That's one that's located near SFO. So it's getting all the SFO stuff, but there's also one over here as well. And then I'm actually in the process of throwing one up as I'm spinning up a bunch of mesh services kind of as we speak. So I'm kind of working on adding some stuff. And that's the thing about the mesh too, is there's no obligation to host any services. You could just be on the mesh. But if you want to host services, it's super easy to do. A lot of it is really geared towards Raspberry Pis and super inexpensive hardware. So there's software that you can throw on there and host any type of service that you want. I mean, there are some restrictions under Part 97 of things you can and can't do, but so long as it falls within Part 97, you can do it. And that's most internet stuff. Most stuff you'd be familiar with on the internet. Kind of on the bottom left there, that's a mesh chat. That actually runs on the mesh nodes. You can install the package and run it on the mesh nodes. So you could have it on every mesh node that exists on the mesh, and it replicates across all the mesh nodes. If I get in there and I just start chatting, you know, in that new message thing, it's going to replicate across all the mesh nodes. So whatever mesh node whatever mesh chat you're connected to on whatever mesh node, you're going to see my message. But because it self-replicates like that, if you know the mesh were to take some damage or links were to go down, the messages would still go through. And then the kind of the bottom right there is just kind of a screenshot from me browsing the mesh from my one of my nodes. That's actually, that page is much longer. It doesn't all fit on the screen, but as you can see, as of that screenshot, as of about an hour ago, we have 137 nodes on the mesh, which is quite a large number. Nearly all of those are RF links. So here's kind of an example of some practical uses for the mesh. This was actually a mobile deployment where we assisted with the San Francisco Marathon and provided comms for the marathon. As you can see in the bottom left photo there, that little pole there, there's a mesh node and a camera on it, and it's sending the webcam feed to that laptop up there in the top, that Surface Pro laptop. So as you can see, there's a lot of practical use cases for the mesh. Here's another one from some of the recent fires we had last year. These are cameras. So these are actually from our friends down in SoCal, as you can tell by the terrain, but they have a lot of sites up in the mountains where the fires are happening. So they were able to actually track the fires and see the response to the fire, as you can see there in the left photo. there's a lot of practical use cases for the mesh. And then of course, we can have fun too. You can play games. And another thing that we do a lot is there's video chat. So we can have, group chat. So here's a group chat with a bunch of us. And then, we also have a PBX. So we have a phone system that runs on the mesh. So I have a couple phones here at home, and I can call anyone on the mesh, through the mesh. And also, believe it or not, I just spun up a Minecraft server the other day. Somebody was joking about how we needed a Minecraft server. So now we have a Minecraft server on the mesh. I don't even play Minecraft, but it's there and it's available. Kind of all of this was just to kind of encourage you guys to, if you're interested, to contact us. There's a lot of different ways to get a hold of us. You can join our mailing list at that link there. Probably the best way to communicate with us, for those of you that use Slack, is to join the SFWEM group on the San Francisco Radio Club Slack, or you can email us at eastbay@sfwem.net. So that's all I got for you guys today. I will send out this presentation. I don't know if we have time, but if you guys want to do any questions, I'm more than happy to answer any questions or get more technical with details if you have them.
I have a quick question. This is Ed. Sure. Your pads over the water, how badly are they affected by fading?
Like all things radio, rain fade, impacts us. Like right now, obviously my nodes are gonna, they're gonna be impacted a little bit, but I haven't personally noticed much of an impact over the water. I got a larger dish kind of for that reason, for my link that's across the bay from my home in Oakland. I'm kind of just above Lake Merritt, like in the Piedmont area. My link across the bay is about 13 miles to just the base of Sutro Towers, Twin Peaks. We have a bunch of nodes there, a big hub site. I haven't really noticed that big of a deal, that big of an impact, but I think it depends on your circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome presentation, thank you. I have a few questions. First off, is the network always on? Like anybody can connect to it, even not in an emergency situation? You just leave it on?
Yep, it's always
cool. On. And where's the POP for the network?
The what?
Like the POP, like where the faucet for the internet is.
So it could be anywhere. So here's my mesh node. When you actually set up your node, there's a checkbox where you can actually check if you want to share your internet connection. So I mean, there's a bunch of different ways you can set it up. So you can do what's called an air gap, right, where the mesh is not connected to your home network any way whatsoever, and that's a workable solution. You can do that. But the people who design the mesh put a lot of effort into making it so that you can connect it to your home network. We typically do that through what's called the MikroTik HAP. It's just a little router. That's what this actually is. As you can see my call sign, and then it's designated as HAP. This is my little Wi-Fi router. This is actually what I'm connected to right now. I'm giving you guys this presentation. So this is what I connect to when I want to get on the mesh. But obviously it connects through to my home internet as well. But then I have my other network that I connect to when I don't want to be on the mesh. When you set up your node, you can actually check a box. So if you go in here and you go to setup, this is really simple. So you could check these boxes right here that says allow others to access my WAN. So if I check that box, then now theoretically, if you were on the mesh, you could get internet access through my node. So it's optional whether or not you want to check that. It's up to you. So, again, this is kind of the configuration. Like you flash the firmware, you go in here and you name it with your call, and then you set up some very basic stuff here, and then you're on the mesh. I mean, what you do is you go in and you point it in the general direction. So if I go to one of my actual RF links, so here you can see my SNR, and you actually can go in here and you can get a chart, so that you can see your SNR. And this is kind of what I was talking about when you're setting it up. But basically all you do is you just point it at another node, and then you run a search, and you can you run this Wi-Fi scan. When you first load the firmware on your node, you put it up on your roof, you go in here to Wi-Fi scan. It's kind of slow, so because it's doing a scan. So yeah, so see, here's what it can see right now. So you go in here and it can see all these nodes. So see, it can see 171, a bunch of 177s, and it can see a 173. So you would just throw your node up on your roof, and you would point it in the general direction and do some sweeping around, and then you would find some stations, and then you'd want to go and you'd want to see, okay, which one which one has the best signal, or which one do I specifically want to connect to? And then you could go in and then you could tune it for that specific channel. So then you would go in and then you would go to setup, and then you go in here and you'd set your channel, right in here. See if I'm 177, but then you'd set it to one of those other ones, and then you'd click save changes and reboot, and then you're basically on the mesh. So, it sets your SSID kind of by default. So you really only need to go in and, you put your call in. You have to have your call, that's required, just like everything ham. You gotta have it announce your call. This is optional, but we like to put your region where you're at, and then we kind of put the hardware just because we like to. And then this is all optional. But basically you go and you set your call. You do that scan. You find your site that you're trying to connect to, and then you dial in your channel here, and then you can go back to the main page here, and then you can get your signal up, and then you can hit right here, and you'll get the sound. And then that's when you could fine tune your node and get your signal to be as strong as you want it to be. So see, I bounce between like 16 and 20. It's raining right now, so my signal is a little bit lower than normal. But anything over 15 is what we consider a good signal. But a lot of people have less signal, and when things happen and you need connectivity, some signal is better than no signal, as you guys know.
Sean, this is John AA6ZT. I have a question. In an earlier slide, it mentioned building relationships with local agencies.
Yep.
Could you identify local agencies that would be interested in participating with this, other than radio clubs? Yeah,
so basically any sort of emergency organization. So we're very entrenched in San Francisco. We do a lot of work with the city and the Moscone Center. We do work with the police department. I'm over here in the East Bay, so I'm not intimately involved with a lot of the stuff that they do over there. So, I'm not the best person to speak on everything, but any sort of emergency response agency that has computers and applications that need to connect, that need data to pass data would benefit by the mesh. So, I mean, if you think of the mesh, the mesh is just a wide area network, right? And the internet is just essentially a network of wide area networks. So, the mesh is basically, you could think of it in a way as kind of like our own little internet. So any application, any modern computer application that could work over TCP/IP, which is what the mesh uses, could benefit by the mesh. So kind of the sky is the limit. So you kind of have to kind of reach out and see what they'd be interested in, or who would be interested in it. So, and that's kind of one of the things that we're working on doing over here in the East Bay now, is kind of getting more involved, like with OES and, all of the local emergency responders, and as I showed in the slide, we did some work with the San Francisco Marathon for monitoring the runners and kind of the environment out there on the race.
Is there a clearing panel or something like that of agencies that are looking for support this way?
Not that I'm aware of. If there is, I would love to know about it. And that's kind of the thing, is you kind of have to just reach out to organizations. A lot of our members are involved with schools and other emergency organizations, and they kind of blend right in with the mesh. So that's kind of how we're kind of getting out there. It's kind of like we're kind of now at that point where we're really going to become attractive to served agencies, because as you can see, the mesh is, it's getting substantial, and so that we have the ability to transmit data from across the bay. We have quite a few bay links, cross bay links. If there was an emergency situation and the internet were to go down, or infrastructure were to go down, we have these wireless links that will likely still be available, or if not, we have the ability to reestablish these links very quickly, kind of just due to our experience deploying this kind of equipment.
Thank you.
So here's a page I was going to show you guys real quick. Unfortunately, it's getting dark out, so that must be an old feed. But a lot of the cameras have gone off for the night, or they don't have much visibility. But this is kind of a page, and this page is actually publicly accessible. That kind of is a collection of all the different mesh cameras. Here's one up at the observatory. up on Skyline in Oakland. But anyways, this is kind of a publicly accessible page with a bunch of the webcams for the mesh on it. And then obviously, here's our website, where it'll have just about everything you would want to know about the mesh. And then obviously here's ARDEN, which this is from the fire hose here. So this is everything you'd ever want to know about ARDEN. So I encourage you guys to take a look at it, or if you just want help getting started, I'm available, and many of our members and volunteers are available. And the best way to get at us is by email or by Slack. All right. Thank you.
I'd like to comment. This is Dick, K2GMY. Years ago, I was playing with ATV, and it was a lot of fun, not too practical. When we started this pandemic thing and we all started using Zoom, I got excited again about how much better video would be. So my interest peaked about mesh. I learned about this particular mesh system, San Francisco SFWEMs. Got a hold of Sean, and as he said, in no time at all, he got back to me, and we had a few conversations. He set me in the right direction. He actually did a look at my location at home, said that we got a viable path eventually to hook up with the San Francisco mesh. As he just put up, Sean just put up a map of the area, and you can see it doesn't extend yet very far out. We can't get into it. So I've ordered a couple of radios, the rocket that he described, the Ubiquit rocket, set up for 5 gigs and 10 megahertz. They will arrive along with a couple of antennas. The interface that Sean mentioned to put you in the tunnel on the internet to eventually connect with San Francisco SFWEMs itself. So my objective is to get it working to where I understand what's going on, because right now I only understand a bit about what Sean has told me, and get that working. I also ordered a secondary radio for a secondary site, the most inexpensive way for a node to get on, with the idea that if I can get the thing working into San Francisco mesh and then working between my 2 radios, the inexpensive entry-level node and the hub, I've ordered enough equipment for a hub. If I can get those 2 things working, then I'll take that second radio and let the club members use that if they would come up with one of their own, and try to get a number of nodes working around town so that we can all eventually communicate digitally with text and, more importantly, video. If that progresses to that point where it goes, then as John mentioned, what agency would be interested in this? Well, our fire department, obviously, and police department. We would have then another layer of emergency communications for our emergency operating center. Sean, we have an emergency operating center at the main firehouse downtown in Benicia, and we have a radio room, an actual radio room that was built into that new firehouse that the Benicia Amateur Radio Club uses. And we have a very good rapport with the city agencies. And after we can get this thing working amongst ourselves as more or less a club project, then one of our people, we have people that deal directly with the fire department that are in the club. They can go then to the fire department and let them know what we've set up and see if they would like to have us make that in addition to what we've already set up at the emergency operating center. And that, Sean, would go from downtown at the building up to our repeater site, which will give us wide area coverage and even into Fairfield. So we could eventually hook up into Fairfield if all this works in a row like that. And by the way, I really have appreciated all the information you've given me so far.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Dick. Yeah, so another way to think of ARDEN is it's just another tool in your IMCOM toolbox. So it doesn't replace HF, it doesn't replace VHF. It's just another tool that you have available to you. If it interests you, you can use it. If it doesn't interest you, then you don't have to use it. But it does have a lot of purposes, and it's very modern, and it kind of keeps pace with kind of the modern things that people expect, you know, the modern things you've become so accustomed to over the internet. You know, you can do a lot of that stuff over the mesh, and the same thing with your served agencies. So yeah, I'm excited to get you guys connected. We get you in with a tunnel, and you guys can build out, and then eventually we'll bridge over that direction. You know, all it takes is, you know, it's strength in numbers. So, you know, if you guys happen to have QTHs along the right to get to Benicia, then, you know, if you guys set up nodes, you can link it that way. Or if you know people that do, you can set them up as well. I mean, this is really about getting the word out. A couple of weeks ago, I found a guy on APRS. I just hopped on APRS and saw he lived in Oakland, not that far away from me. Googled his call sign, saw that he had posted in the ARDEN forums back in 2016, talking about he was interested in mesh. I just emailed him and said, hey, I saw you were interested in mesh. Did you ever get connected? He replies back, oh no, there was nobody around. I couldn't get anything up, but I have all these nodes. And I'm like, so I did some surveys for him, sent him some stuff. I'm like, you could get on right now. You know, this is what you should do. This is how you should configure a node. And he got online really quickly. So it's just really about getting the word out. So, you know, if you guys aren't interested in mesh, but, you know, you like the concept, just please share the word, because you know, I found out, believe it or not, this has only been about a year I've been involved with the mesh. I just found out about it right when the pandemic happened. You know, right when the pandemic started, you know, I'm like, I need something to be available if things get really bad, you know, what's out there? And I stumbled across it, and, you know, and then kind of it's just been all downhill from there. But, you know, I would have known about it years ago. So I wish somebody would have reached out to me and be like, hey, have you heard about this thing called the mesh? So because, you know, the mesh it just really speaks to me, and I'm really excited about it. And I hope that you guys, some of you at least, share that excitement. I think it's a really awesome tool.
Is Sean, is the tunnel a VPN?
It's like a VPN. You have to have ARDEN specific. So to do a tunnel, you have to tunnel between node to node.
Right.
So any ARDEN node could do the tunnel. So the radio could do the tunnel. The HAP can do the tunnel. Most of us use that little wireless access point to do tunnels. Okay. Or you could use that little USB key to do a tunnel. Like I have a little USB key that I could just give to somebody, and they could stick it in their computer, and they're on the mesh. So yeah, but you have to have an ARDEN device. You can't just install some software on your computer and tunnel it.
So if you're using a home internet connection, what type of upload download speeds do you need?
Probably any modern internet connection. You know, I mean, I'm assuming you're not on dial-up, but even dial-up would work. But yeah, I mean, any modern internet connection, it's not reliant on bandwidth. You know, ARDEN has a lot. It does have a lot of available bandwidth, but the bandwidth is going to depend on a lot of factors, right? Like your RF links. You can actually look, and you can actually see what your bandwidth is at any given time. So like here's some bandwidth you can see on the screen.
That's awfully small. That's awfully small. Can you expand it?
It's small. Yeah, well, I mean, it's raining and the circumstances are such, so it's going to vary, right? But it's an RF link. But you know, if your
I meant the type is small. The page is small.
Oh, okay. I see.
A lot of old folks on this.
Is that better?
That's better. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So you know, it's not like a ton of bandwidth. You know, like it's more bandwidth than any other ham radio thing you'll ever do. But obviously, it depends on your link, right? So sometimes my link is much higher. We have some links that are 200 megabits per second. So it just kind of depends on the circumstances. But yeah, if you're tunneled in, you're going to have a lot more bandwidth with a modern internet connection to the mesh than you would if you had an RF link, or if you had a really good RF link, you're going to have a lot more bandwidth. Or if this is on a 10 megahertz of bandwidth link. But yeah, if we go to 20 megahertz, we'll get in like closer to 200. But a lot of our nodes are still using 10 megahertz because that's kind of what we got started on. But one of the committees that kind of I'm championing for is having a network infrastructure committee, And, because prior to this, we had zero organization. It was everybody just putting up their nodes and linking into everybody else. So now we're kind of creating a little bit of organization. We're trying not to be too organized to make it so that it's not, we want it to be fun. But, a little bit of organization or organizational structure kind of never hurts anybody. So, we're going to have some teams that actually take a look and see like, well, if we change these frequencies here, or if we change this bandwidth here, we're going to improve the throughput, or we're going to make the mesh more resilient or stronger. So, we're kind of in the process of schooling up a group with that kind of goal. So, again, like if you guys are interested in getting involved, there's a bunch of different niches that, some people, we have people that are EEs or former EEs. And they're kind of leading the charge developing our weather sensor. Who's more qualified to develop a little weather sensor than a bunch of EEs? So they're kind of leading that charge. So, everyone has their unique talent. So, we try to put our, if you want to volunteer, we try to put our resources, where they're going to kind of do the most good.
Thank you.
John, this is Dick again. Do you think I should change my order from 10 megs to 20 meg on those rockets?
You mean to the bandwidth?
Yeah.
That's kind of up to you. So so you're going to get a stronger SNR the lower bandwidth you use. So if you're trying to obviously this isn't your case right now because you're starting from scratch, but if you were trying to reach another node in your area and you connected over 20 megahertz, but your SNR was pretty poor, if you guys went to 10, you would get more SNR. So that's kind of a way to think about it. You get a little bit better connection, but your throughput would be a little bit more limited. So it kind of just depends on your area and your circumstances. Again, this is RF we're talking about, and all RF, it kind of depends on your location and your circumstances. If you guys are starting from scratch, you guys could build up and use 20 megahertz and get more throughput. But obviously, there's pluses and minuses to everything. So it's just something that you're going to have to play around with, and it's all ham radio. We're all just having fun and experimenting. So, maybe you try 20 and it works, but maybe you try 10 and it works better, or vice versa.
Yeah, maybe I better just keep it at 10 until the time comes when we want to expand out, because it's such a long haul.
Yeah. And if you're trying to link with us, for example, a lot of our sites are 10 right now. So we only have a few 20. And that was actually me that started, I was able to convince some people. I'm like, let's try out some 20 megahertz and see if it works for us. And, we've recently done a couple 20 megahertz, but we're largely 10. So if you're trying to mesh in with the greater SFWEM, you're going to have better luck with 10. But like I said, it's not hard. You just go in here. You can just go in here and you can change it. So, I'm at 10 right now. I can go to 5 or I can go to 20, and I hit this, and then I hit save changes, and I hit reboot, and then I'm up at 20 megahertz. But, obviously the node that I'm connected to has to be running at that same frequency. So if I go to 20 right now, I'm going to drop my connection from this node because, the other guy's running 10. So, it's super easy to change. This is if those of you guys that are familiar with DDR or OpenWRT or DDWRT that use them on your home routers, this is it. It's super simple. So I don't have the tunnel software installed on this particular thing or the client. There's a server or a client, so you can host a server or you can be a client. But this is it. There's only a few options in here. They have it really stripped down, bare bones. So this is like the advantage of connecting it to your home internet. Like I said, I can do this Zoom conference with you through my home internet on the mesh because I'm connected to my internet, but also you can go in here and you can update your firmware. If you're not connected to your home internet, you're going to have to download the firmware on like a flash drive or something and upload it to the node. But if you're connected to the internet, you can just go click refresh right here and it'll pull down the latest firmware, and then you kind of select it and then you hit download, and then it'll update this firmware on your node. So once you get the firmware installed on the node, it's super easy to do. And like I said, it's super simple. These are the options you have on the top, and really all you got to do is you got to go into this basic setup and set a couple things, mostly your call sign and your correct frequency to connect to the other node. And you really don't have to mess with anything else. It's very simple. It's designed to be super user friendly, and it's all automatic. Like I said, you point the node in another direction of another node and set it to the right channel and frequency, and it's going to mesh with that other node. And you even just leave this as auto right here, and it'll automatically adjust its power to be the most, the highest power you can use, or an all ham radio thing, we're supposed to use the lowest power that we can get away with. So it'll actually go in here and it'll actually do calculations. It'll figure out what its optimum power is, and it will set itself to that. So it's super easy to do. So that's kind of why I didn't want to go into too much detail with the mesh, because like I said, it could be super complicated. I mean, I can SSH into this node, and I can get in Linux, and I can configure it all I want, but I don't have to do that. I can just keep it really simple as you want it to be, or as complicated as you want it to be.
Oh, thank you very much, Sean. That was very enlightening. Really appreciate it. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, thank
Very
you.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you.